Well, good morning, everybody. I'm very excited to be here this morning. As Kevin said, I have been with Monrovia for 21 years. I've been the rep for Arkansas and some other states for 17 years. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is stuff that I've learned basically at the end of a shovel over 20-something years. I like to dig a lot of holes. I like to try a lot of different plants. I'm a very proud plant geek, for sure. And one of the things that I try to focus on when I'm doing talks like this about new or different or maybe underutilized plant materials is I try to make sure that it's something that either River Valley already has on order or that they can get on order. Because for a plant geek, there's nothing more frustrating than hearing about really cool new stuff that hasn't even been imported from Europe and you can't get it for 5 more years. So everything that I'm going to talk about will be available here at some point or could be available at some point. I kind of tried to title this talk From Sun to Shade Rockstar Plants for Arkansas or Little Rock Landscapes, and it basically was born out of the idea that the clicker's not going to want to go forward. Yeah, that's fine. I can toggle forward if I need. Anyway, basically, one thing that I found in my travels and working with a lot of different garden centers and things and talking to a lot of different homeowners is that you're walking around the garden center and you see a plant that you love but how do you take like the plants that you find in the garden center and take them home and make them into a landscape? So basically, that's kind of what I'm trying to help everybody do today, is to get from, okay, I found a plant that I love in the garden center. Basically, now what? Where does it go? What are the other plants that it works well with? Is it an accent? Is it a specimen? Is it a foundation plant? And so to kind of make things really easy, I sort of chose the focus of pick 3 plants. If you're doing a sun, shade, or partial sun or part shade garden, if you just pick 3 plants, a good foundation plant, a good accent plant, and a good specimen plant, you're going to have a fine landscape no matter what. And also you can kind of think of those things in terms of context of, okay, I already have a great foundation planting in this area, but I'd like to add something to it. That should help you as you're shopping in the garden centers. What is a rockstar plant? Well, this particular plant is actually an alstroemeria that's called rock and roll. So obviously I chose that photo, but I tried to pick things that are different, that are very, very durable and reliable performers, not only in terms of their tolerance for cold weather, but also in terms of their tolerance for our hot, sunny summers that we have here. And things that are definitely, like all rock stars are unique. That's kind of what makes them so compelling. Whether it's Mick Jagger or Adam Levine or whoever it is, there's something about them that stands out that's a little bit different than the rest of the crowd. So we'll start with shade. Shade is often a frustrating spot for people, and I've chosen some foundation plants for shade. These would be the plants, kind of the workhorses of the garden. These are going to provide structure. The first one that I've chose is the sawtooth aucuba, or the Aucuba serratifolia. This is an absolutely really good, tough plant. It will tolerate deep, heavy shade. It does get a white flower that's relatively insignificant in the springtime, but it will set a red berry in the fall, provided you don't prune off all the flowers. That's where your berries are going to be. But really nice, relatively slow growing, but it's got really lustrous, dark green leaves, so it's a great plant for shade. It's particularly nice if you've got lighter colored, maybe stucco or stonework or something like that up against your house. That dark color really shows well against that kind of a backdrop. It's something that we'll say 4 to 6 feet tall, roughly, maybe 3 or 4 feet wide, but a great workhorse foundation plant for shade. And I guess I should mention too, as I'm going through any of these plants, if you all have questions, feel free to go ahead and ask me. If you've had some experience with something that you'd like to share, that's fine. Or if you'd prefer to wait till the end, I'll be hanging around afterwards. You're more than welcome to come up and talk to me at that point. This is a plant, as a foundation plant, that I think would be a little bit outside the normal considerations. It's a dwarf shrub-type Japanese maple called Shana. And like you see in the picture, it grows basically like a big red ball. It's much more like a shrub than a small tree. It's absolutely one of my personal favorites. This one I found also will tolerate more sun than most of the Japanese maples in our climate here. It's got tiny little foliage that just absolutely glows red when it flushes in the springtime. Good red fall color on this. We listed in our catalog at 6 to 8 feet tall and a little bit wider. I don't think you'd ever see it get that big here. Maybe in the 4 to 6 foot range, about that wide. and could easily be maintained. It's going to take it a while to get there. It's not a particularly fast grower. When you see it in the pot, there's really short breaks between the internodes. I mean, it's one of those that's going to grow maybe an inch or two a year. That's about it. But it's a beautiful little plant, something a little bit different for shade for sure. And a really nice, with that small foliage, really nice fine texture on that one.
Does it stay red all year?
Yes. And part of it, especially if you can get it some sun, you know, like an eastern exposure, something like that, where it's got morning sunlight. Like I've said, I've had really good luck with this one in basically full sun in Tulsa, as long as it's irrigated, mulched, you know, kind of normal considerations. I'm hesitant to guarantee anything in this part of the world because we're so hard on plants. I mean, if you get a summer where it, you know, like we had in 11 and 12, when it's 100 degrees for 100 days in a row, it's probably going to scorch, but it's a really neat plant. This is a Blue Enchantress hydrangea. This is actually a Monrovia exclusive. We came out with this one a couple of years ago. This was actually a sport that we found in our field of in the summer hydrangea. And we went back and spoke to them about possibly partnering with them on this plant. They decided they didn't have an interest in it, but we absolutely did. It's a stronger, more vigorous form of the in the summer. It's got these beautiful kind of jet black to ruby red stems on it. It is a repeat bloomer. We treat everything with aluminum sulfate before it leaves the nursery, so you're pretty much guaranteed to get a good blue flower on it. But very nice repeat blooming macrophylla type hydrangea in the 4 to 5 foot tall, 4 to 5 foot wide. A little more interest in terms of stem and whatnot, so it's definitely a good plant. We've actually replaced in the summer. We're growing only this one for as far as repeat flowering blue hydrangeas now.
When do you cut those back, or do you cut those back?
Well, on the repeat bloomers, because they will flower on new wood, it makes much less difference. But in general, my advice to people is as soon as it's done flowering, if you want to give it a little shape at that point, that's usually the best time to do it. This is an old-fashioned plant that it's still one of the most reliable flowering plants for shade, in my opinion, the old Caria or Japanese rose. It is a relatively fast grower. It is an early bloomer, so that's nice. It has a little bit more informal kind of a twiggy appearance, but it's got a nice little kind of button-like sized dark yellow flower on it. Good reliable flowering plant for shade. We listed it 8 to 10 feet tall. Most of the time when I see them in the landscape, they're kept somewhere around 5 or 6 feet tall, something like that. But it's just a good, tough, old-fashioned plant that I don't know if it's not that well known, but I think it's certainly worthy of more consideration than it seems to get. Osmanthus Jonckowski is another plant that's a personal favorite of mine. It's a really good, tough, durable plant for shade. Its name actually means 5 colors. When the new growth comes out, it'll come out kind of red, and then it'll sort of fade to pink, and you'll get different mottled shades of green and white and cream, and that's where the name comes from, because it's got literally 5 different colors on the foliage. This is a plant that doesn't really flower. It's a foliage plant. It's also referred to as a false holly sometimes because it's kind of spiny, but the foliage on it is actually pretty soft, but the foliage on it is very reminiscent of a holly. It's good, tough plant. It does well also in dry shade type conditions, but it's also a great foundational plant with the foliage that it's got. It's a great complement to things like Japanese maples or like the sawtooth aucubas or azaleas. The one thing with shade gardens is they can get pretty dark pretty quickly. So this is a great plant to kind of provide some light and movement with your eye in the shade garden.
Is it deer resistant?
It is actually relatively deer resistant. In my experience, if the deer are hungry enough, they'll eat anything. But because it's spiny, like they'll have a tendency to maybe browse this one. If there are other tastier plants around, they'll eat those first.
How does it compare in hardiness to the other osmanthus, the green ones?
Well, there's a lot of different osmanthus out there. This one, I would say, is fully hardy for. I mean, this is a zone 6, so that gets it down, all the way to about 0 or so. Yeah. I guess put another way, if this one dies, you're going to have other stuff that's dead. And then accent plants. So you've got your foundation plant. You want to choose some accents. This is another one that I absolutely love. Golden variegated sweet flag, Acorus ogon. This is a great little plant, bright gold. Again, it's really great for brightening up shady areas, great complement to hostas, ferns, azaleas, camellias, all those kinds of things. Yellow can be a really important color in the landscape because it really helps move your eye from place to place. This is an evergreen also, which is nice. And this one is actually, if you've got, it can be a really good problem solver if you've got wet, boggy, maybe poorly draining soil, stuff like that. I mean, you can actually grow this in a pond if you wanted to, but it does great in the ground, but can be a real problem solver for sites like that. If you've got a place that just doesn't want to drain, or maybe when you get a heavy rain or a bunch of rain like we've had, maybe it'll sit there for a couple of days. Most people have a spot like that in the yard. This is a good plant for that kind of a spot. Gets maybe 10, 12 inches tall, makes kind of a little basal clump. It'll kind of form a natural colony over time, but it's not an aggressive spreading type plant. You're not going to have to worry about it taking over things. The Lenten rose, the hellebores, they've got a bunch of different ones out here. I picked a couple of the ones that they've got this year. This is Florence Piketty down here. This is Ivory Prince. Again, a great evergreen perennial. There aren't that many options in the perennial world that are evergreen. Good plants for shade. They're often called the Lenten rose because they flower during Lent around this time of year. So it's really nice, gives you some interest at a time of year when there's not a lot maybe going on in the garden. Like I said, they are evergreen, and they're really, once established, they're really, really durable, long-lived plants. They're just really nice little accent type plants for shady garden, roughly 15, 18 inches, 12 inches tall, depending on variety. But really, really neat. And you see more and more of them every year. There's been all kinds of different hybrids that are coming out, new series. There's been a lot of breeding done in hellebores in the last few years.
Josh, would you like to try?
Sure. Let's see. Oh, look at that. Okay, this is a black mondo grass, a variety called Ebony Night. They've got some of that out here too. This one is really, really interesting because it's almost jet black. It tends to be very slow growing, but a great plant for shade. And this one it really shows best if you get it planted around something that's kind of chartreusey, maybe some coral bells, or kind of a limey colored hosta, something like that, near the Osmanthus goshiki. You kind of need something bright or lighter colored around it, maybe variegated to really show it off. But it's a really interesting little plant. It grows pretty much like the regular mondo grass does, 5, 6 inches tall, a little bit wider. But it's really, really interesting. And I've seen this plant used in some interesting places. They have this at because I'm a plant geek, I tend to notice things. And at Disneyland, they're always sort of trying to create, the ambiance of the different rides that it's in. And they've got a bunch of this planted as you enter the Haunted Mansion there. I always thought that was kind of cool. I've got a couple of hostas that are actually Monrovia exclusives. This was hybridization that was done by a couple of members of our team there at the nursery. This one is absolutely one of my favorites. It's a variety called Eola Sapphire. It's a big blue hosta to about waist high, roughly 3 feet wide. It's got a really nice seersuckered texture to the leaf. It's got a lot of substance, so it does tend to be slug resistant, and a real nice bright steely blue color. Has kind of a pale white flower like most of the hostas do, but really, really neat. Like I said, large scale type hosta, great for shade gardens. And then we've got another one that's kind of bright yellow. It's a variety called Rosedale's Golden Goose. The name Rosedale is actually named after the founder of Monrovia Nursery. Harry Rosedale was the gentleman that founded Monrovia, and his son Miles is still our CEO. So that's where the name Rosedale comes from, in case you were curious. But another one, similar scale, maybe not quite as tall, not quite as wide, but again, it's got a really nice heavy substance to the leaves, bright gold color, white flower, really nice, interesting plant for shade. And then specimen plants. Japanese maples are absolutely one of my favorites. They're a total natural. I chose to highlight this variety. It's a variety called Deshojo. It's one that we added just a couple of years ago, but it's a relatively small growing Japanese maple in the 8 to 10 foot range, which can be nice. Makes it, it'll fit in a spot in a lot of smaller suburban gardens, like a lot of people have nowadays, but comes out with bright, brilliant kind of pink to red new growth on it. Just a really nice, interesting looking Japanese maple, great specimen plant for shade. It also does great in containers and things like that. If you've got shady pots, maybe out by the pool cabana or over the overhang by the front door, it's a great choice for that. It'd be very long-lived in containers. Acanthus oak leaf, this one it's called Grecian pattern plant. You'll hear it called bear's breeches. This is another one that's really good for dry shade, and basically I just describe this to people as a hardy philodendron. That's pretty much what it looks like. Big, interesting architectural leaves. It throws a flower spike in the springtime. The one problem that most people have with this plant that I see sometimes, if it gets really, really hot, sometimes it will start to kind of flop. It will actually go summer dormant rather than winter dormant. And people will see it, it'll start to yellow, and then they'll start pouring the water to it, and that's the worst possible thing you can do. Just let it go, and it'll pop back up usually when the temperature cools in the fall. But again, a big scale, 3 feet tall or so, 3 feet wide, really interesting. And then in terms of camellias, we tend to think of them more as foundation shrubs, but they do have a bunch in stock here that are in more of a patio tree form, like this Indian hawthorn. They've got a weeping variety called Marge Miller that almost makes a similar silhouette to like a small scale, like weeping cherry, weeping Japanese maple, nice pink flower on it. Beautiful. You can see there's a picture of one there. And then they've got you probably noticed some of the Camellia japonicas that are out there in a patio tree form. Also, this is more of a spring flower versus a fall flower, but again, beautiful, kind of nice formal specimen type, great in containers. Great for shady areas, nice evergreen plant the rest of the year. Now we're going to move from shade to sun, talk about some foundation plants for sunny areas. A couple of plants that there is a lot of buzz about in the trade. I think I mentioned these when I was here last year, are the Distilliums. There's a couple different varieties out there. First one is called Blue Cascade. It's a nice kind of a dark sort of bluish green foliage to it, but these plants are just really, really tough, durable, workhorse type plants. Something that would easily be maintained in the 3 to 4 foot tall, 3 to 4 foot wide range. Basically no pest problems, no disease problems. They're relatively drought tolerant once they're established. They grow pretty quickly. So there's a lot of appeal to these for broadleaf evergreen. And there's another variety that's called Emerald Heights that gets slightly taller, maybe a little bit more of like a medium green foliage, more in the 5 foot range roughly. But again, any of these could be maintained shorter than that. The more you shear them, the fuller and nicer they get. They're very much like a holly or a boxwood in that area. But they are fast growing, a little bit different texture, and just basically bulletproof once they're in the landscape. Chilipo euonymus is one that I chose. This particular variety, it has a similar look. It's almost like midway between like a Silver King or Silver Queen euonymus and the old-fashioned golden euonymus. It's a little bit more of kind of a chartreusey color than a gold. But this is a good fast grower. Will get relatively big if you leave it alone, but again, it could be easily maintained anywhere from about 2 or 3 feet up to about 6 or 7 feet. But this particular variety is the most disease and scale resistant Japanese type evergreen euonymus that I'm aware of. So that's kind of the old knock on a lot of the old fashioned euonymus. This one is a little bit tougher, but nice evergreen foundation type plant. Another plant that I happen to really, really like is a viburnum. It's an obovatum variety called World Class. And it basically, if you want to think of it, think of a flowering dwarf Yopon holly. That's pretty much exactly what it looks like. It's got small little round foliage like the dwarf Yopons do, but you get a nice white flower in the springtime. I've seen these go anywhere from full sun to almost full shade. They're good, tough, durable plants. They'll cover a wide range of areas, something that, 4 to 5 foot tall, 4 to 5 foot wide. But if you're thinking of planting like a dwarf Yopon holly, I think this is a great choice because you get a little more interest out of it. You do get a nice white flower in the springtime, and you've got nice evergreen foliage the rest of the year. And then the Southern Moon dwarf Yellow Hawthorn. This is one that actually A couple of members of our team at our Georgia production facility were involved with the hybridization of this one, but this is a really good, another good, tough workhorse type plant. It is, for us at the nursery, absolutely the most disease-resistant Indian hawthorn that we grow. We have to do almost no spraying on this one. And this is one you can put it in the ground, let it go, you hardly ever have to touch it. It's very well behaved, has a good sort of symmetrical kind of, it's a little bit different than some of the other Indian hawthorns in that it tends to grow, it's a little more globose, it grows a little bit more like a ball than a mound, but really nice dark green color. It would be a good substitute for plants like autoleucans and things like that that can struggle in this environment a little bit at times. But nice white flower in the springtime, good dark green foliage. It'll take on just a little bit of kind of hints of burgundy in the wintertime, but a really good, tough, foundational type plant for here.
What type of soil does it require?
It's relatively tolerant of most soil types. Like most plants, it doesn't like particularly heavy. It doesn't like to have wet feed. It doesn't like to have standing water. But in terms of alkaline, acid, like it's pretty tolerant kind of across the board there.
Full sun?
Yeah, full sun. These could go. I've got them listed here in full sun, and they do great in full sun. But they'll tolerate a relatively, quite a bit of shade too, really.
What about pruning of hawthorns
Mm-hmm.
when they need a haircut?
Right? Well, this one, I mean, is you'll have. There's not much to do. I mean, it grows. We've got some that are out in the planted in front of the nursery in Georgia that have been there for probably 10 years. They're maybe this tall and about this wide, and they basically haven't been touched. So this is one I would say, if you want to prune it, I'd prune it right after it flowers. But this is kind of one, you don't really need to do much of a shear on this one. It's maybe more of a selective prune, a tip prune. Maybe you've got a branch that's, kind of flopping out there at an angle that you don't like or something like that. But this one doesn't require much pruning. And some accent plants for sunny areas. This is a plant that Monrovia brought to market years ago. It's still absolutely one of my favorites. It's an agapanthus variety called Midnight Blue. In my opinion, it's the truest, brightest blue. Most of them tend to be a little more violet or lavender or kind of more of like a powder blue. This is a good dark blue, great tough perennial. It'll get, say 18 to 24 inches tall. It'll get about that wide. It's got that nice green strappy type foliage on it. Good tough plant. And this in terms of agapanthus, is the hardiest one that we grow. It's hardy all the way down to zone 5 or 6. So it's a good, extremely hardy selection for this area. It can be kind of semi-evergreen in milder winters. In harder winters, it will go dormant and be deciduous, but it's a really good, tough little plant. And it's also, as you can see, it's great in containers, and it's a personal favorite.
Does it spread by all trees?
Yes. Flower Carpet Rose series as a series, I always like to highlight these. We've been growing these for years. They're really good, tough, disease-resistant roses, and they kind of fill a gap between, most people are familiar with things like the Knockout Rose, which is a little bit taller, more rounded. These are more moundy and sprawling. And most people are familiar with drift rose, which are going to be shorter. This would be kind of in between. If a knockout rose is here in the 4-foot area roughly, these are going to be more in the 3-foot, and then you've got the drifts that are kind of more like 2 feet. But these are good. They flower over a very long season, extremely disease resistant. There's a bunch of different colors. I don't even have them all here. There's red, there's white, there's amber, there's a coral color, there's pink, there's pink splash, which is that little kind of variegated flower. There's a couple of different reds, so they fill a lot of different spots in the landscape, and they're very heavy feeders. These, the more you feed them, the more they flower. Typically in my yard, I've got the amber planted at my house, and once it goes through a flowering cycle, I'll go through, kind of deadhead it, give it a little fertilizer, and it'll be off and running. It'll be budding again in a week or two. So they'll kind of keep going.
So I have some of those, and do they need to be pruned because they're coming out now?
Mm-hmm.
They're leafing out now. Do they need much pruning or not?
I would say the beauty of these is it's whatever you want to do. I mean, you can not prune them at all. They'll be totally fine. You can give them a mild prune. They'll be totally fine. You can go in and cut them all off 4 inches from the ground, and they'll pop out. It just kind of depends on, where you want to manage them. Mine, every maybe 3 or 4 years, I'll go through and cut them basically back to about 3 or 4 inches, just to kind of keep them a little shorter and fuller. But You don't really need to do anything to them. Whatever you do is going to be the right thing. This heat wave salvia series, this is a series that we picked up a number of years ago. Also very good, tough plants, especially for hot summer gardens. I mean, once these things go into flower, usually around April sometime, they'll stay in flower pretty much the entire rest of the season. They're great for hummingbirds, bees, butterflies. Everybody loves these salvias. They've got several different colors ranging kind of from pink to purple to white to red, but they all are pretty similar in terms of habit, you know, maybe 30 inches tall, 30 inches wide, but great for full sun, and they just crank out flowers pretty much from when they start until the weather gets really cold. But really tough, durable plants. They're drought tolerant, certainly. These are also great if you've got a spot that's maybe it's out by the mailbox and the irrigation doesn't quite get there, or you know, it's really hot and sunny, you've got a lot of reflected heat or something. These plants are very, very happy in that kind of a environment. And then another one kind of in a similar vein. This is a brand new series for us. It's a series of campsus or trumpet vine, and a lot of people have, trumpet vines are tough, but a lot of people have horror stories about them, you know, trying to pick up their house and move it down the block and things like that. This is a whole new series that's actually kind of a dwarf to semi-dwarf. And we're actually growing them, we're doing some patio tree standards like you see in the upper right-hand corner there. But these plants naturally will only maybe get 5-6 feet tall. So we're actually growing them as a shrub. So it's another good, in terms of something, they're going to be a little bit slower to get started than like some of the salvias and the roses and things are. But it's something like once they start flowering, they're going to flower all summer. Again, they're great for bees, butterflies, hummingbirds. You've got a couple of different colors. You've got a yellow, you've got a kind of an orangey red called, the orangey red one is called Jazz Fire, and then the gold one is called Jazz Gold. But we're pretty excited about these, and I think in particular, some of the other sort of summer flowering plants that are starting to experience some problems, the rosette with the roses and things, this and some of the crepe myrtle issues, this is a great plant that flowers all summer. That this could be an option for you in terms of replacing some of those.
How long do you leave it in the pot? How many years?
Well, you could leave it relatively indefinitely, I would think.
Outgrow the pot.
No, it shouldn't. I mean, every couple of years it might be good to just pop it out and either put it in a bigger container, do a little root pruning, but in general, they're also great for pots if you've got a spot. They don't look that great in the wintertime, but if you've got a spot that's, I could see it being really great like on patios or maybe on pool decks or something where you've got not just a lot of sun, but you've also got all that reflected heat from the pool decking and things. This is a plant that will thrive in a really hot environment like that. And then some specimen plants. That's my backyard. Tried to pick a few things that are a little bit different. Giant timber bamboo is another personal favorite. And people hear the word bamboo, and a lot of times they run screaming. But this is a plant, it's actually, there are different types of bamboo. And most of the running type of bamboo that you see offered for sale in Arkansas in the nursery trade are Phylostachys varieties, and they are aggressive runners. This is actually a bambusa. It's a true bamboo, and it's a clumping type of bamboo. It doesn't outgrow its space like a running type bamboo does. And this one gets big, huge, I call them like jungle canes, you know, 4 or 5 inch culms on it. I found that picture on the internet. I threw that in there, the picture of the dog. Just, you can see how big the canes are relative to his head, but it makes big, giant, nice canes. Those can also be great for harvesting, for home decorating and things like that. But a really nice selection, great for full sun. It will tolerate some shade, but it gets big, 25, 30 feet tall. I've seen them. We used to have one of these at the original nursery in Azusa that was planted out that we actually ended up, it was a clump that had probably been there for 40 or 50 years. We sold it to Disney World when they built the Animal Kingdom. They came and bought it, but it had shoots that were probably 40, 50 feet tall. Just really, really pretty, really beautiful, just interesting, great specimen.
Does it require a lot of water?
Average water needs, I would say. I mean, most of the bamboos, like, you know, that perfect, they want what almost all plants want. Evenly moist, you know.
They don't always get it.
No, that's true. Cedars, blue atlas cedars in particular, I've got a couple of my favorite plants. I absolutely love the cedars. This is a variety similar to the blue atlas like you see planted out here on the corner, but this is a columnar or fastigiate variety. It's just called Cedrus atlantica fastigiata. But very nice, narrow, upright silhouette. These plants I found are very, very tough once established. Again, they're very tolerant of summer heat. They just don't like to be too wet. When I see them struggle around here, it's usually because they're too wet in the summer. They don't like to be too wet, particularly when the temps are really but you get them in and established in an area, and these are beautiful plants. Nice silvery blue foliage. This one, you know, I'd say average landscape height probably around here would be in the 18 to 25 foot range, something like that, maybe 6-8 feet wide. They can kind of widen out over time, but you're talking about probably a 30-year project there. So, but this is a great plant for narrower spaces, tighter spaces, and you'll see when you see them in the container, like the branches are very ascending on them. They're very much upright, and it tends to be a fuller brancher. You see juvenile blue atlas cedars, and they tend to look really gangly. They're kind of like an ugly duckling a little bit. You know, they just don't branch that freely when they're young. And then a couple, I noticed they've got some of these in stock. This is another one that I really, really like. It's not an Atlantica, it's a deodar type cedar called Phelan Blue. But this is a plant also that's got a soft spot in my heart. Our old sales manager, Cliff Comstock, was with Monrovia for probably 40 years, and Cliff was kind of in charge. He's the one that really pioneered our plant patent program and our trademark program. This was the last plant that Cliff ever brought to the nursery. And it's a great little plant. It's a sprawling, spreading, kind of a prostrate type growing deodar cedar. It's got a nice silvery blue foliage. This one, again, is great as a specimen. It's great around boulders or water features where you can kind of just let it do its thing. It'll get maybe 2-3 feet tall. It'll get wider over time. But because of its interesting habit and character, we also do it a number of different ways. We do it top grafted as a patio tree. It makes a really interesting sculptural kind of a patio tree. We do it staked, where it makes kind of almost a small sort of semi-pyramidal kind of half weeping kind of a specimen plant, but it's really, really interesting. And this plant in the field, actually, we found a chance sport of it that we named Feeling Sunny. That Feeling Sunny is a little bit more upright than Feeling Blue is, maybe more in the 3-foot range or so, but again, kind of wants to widen out, but nice bright gold accent, great for really hot, dry locations in the summertime garden, but really, really interesting little plant. And we do this one top grafted, we do it staked. It's got a lot of interest to it. And then we've also got, this is another plant that Cliff brought to us years ago. Most people are familiar with Italian cypress, but not that many people are familiar with golden Italian cypress. Similar habit attributes to the regular Italian cypress, but it's got a nice kind of limey, chartreusey, bright gold color to it. These are also great in containers, but a nice, interesting, upright type specimen for sun. And then this is a plant that we picked up a few years ago. Again, we had some people at the nursery that were involved with the breeding of this plant. It's a variety of holly called Emerald Colonnade. And basically, the way I describe this to people is this is like a 10-foot pyramidal boxwood. That's exactly what it looks like. It's got small, rounded, soft foliage. You don't get all the stickers that some people don't like about the hollies. It is a male, so it doesn't berry, but this plant I have found to be super vigorous, just really, really tough. It grows like a rocket. So it would be a good replacement for maybe things like Leyland cypress and whatnot that can have issues over the long term, but really nice, dark green, evergreen, fast growing, perfect for, it could be a specimen, it could be a hedge, it could be a screen. We do a lot of topiaries out of this particular plant, so it's very well suited to that kind of thing too, spirals and poodles and whatnot. But this is a plant that, of the plants we've added in the last few years, I'm probably more excited about this one because it's got such a broad range of uses and it fills a real need in the landscape. And then ginkgo is another tree that I happen to love. This is a dwarf variety called Jade Butterfly. There are a number of different dwarf ginkgos out there. This one's maybe a little more upright. You tend to see them a lot of times kind of top grafted into a little ball. But this one is, we grow as a little bit more of an upright, kind of a loosely pyramidal type specimen plant. Great gold color. I've always had a soft spot for these because when my girls were little, they used to call them whale tail trees because of the way that the foliage on them looks. But Really good plant and it also kind of fits in, not a lot of the suburban lots and whatnot. You don't really have room, particularly up maybe on the corner of the house or something like that, to put a maple or an oak or something that's going to get 30 or 40 feet tall and wide. This is one that's going to stay very much in scale. And then the hardy fiber bananas. This is a plant, like if you want a really good sort of a tropical type look, particularly great around like pools and things like that. These grow like a rocket. They're fully hardy here. There's a bunch of these. I live in the Tulsa area, planted in somebody's backyard about a mile from my house, and you can see them. They do go dormant in the wintertime, but by the end of the summer, they're all up there 12, 15 feet tall. These do grow relatively quickly, so sometimes it's good to have them in a spot maybe where they're contained by by a sidewalk or something like that. But you can harvest the pups off of these. I mean, they grow like a rocket. But really interesting plant, something a little bit different for sure, and great for if you want kind of more of a tropical type look for your landscape. But something that is hardy and you can grow in the ground. You don't have to worry about hauling it in and out. The one thing with all bananas is that if we get a really, really windy day, they can have a tendency, the foliage on them will shred a little bit. It does have a tendency to kind of tear itself up. And then the Majestic Beauty Indian hawthorns. This is a baby one right here, but you can see it's all budded up. They get a beautiful pink flower. This is a large-scale growing type Indian hawthorn. That's what makes it so great for patio trees and things. But you see a mature one like they've got pictured there. They're really, really nice. They make a very nice formal kind of rounded head on them. They're great for more formal type gardens and things like that. It's also just a great small ornamental tree. It's evergreen, but if you don't have a ton of space, this is a good option. You get a nice pink flower in the springtime, and you've got foliage all year. But really nice plant. And then foundation plants for partial sun. Does anybody know the difference between part sunny and part shade? It can't be part sunny at night. So. They're kind of interchangeable, but anyway. But I tried to pick out some plants. We've got a bunch. There's been a ton of breeding done in the hydrangea genus. I'm sure you've noticed that more and more are around. But the paniculatas in particular are some of my favorites. They're very, very durable, reliable performers, and they're very, very reliable flower producers. That's one thing. A lot of people sometimes get frustrated with the macrophyllus. One year they bloom great, the next year they don't. They get frustrated. These are very reliable flower producers and will take a lot more sun, particularly if they're irrigated and mulched. But this is a variety called Limelight. Proven Winners developed this one a number of years ago. It's a relatively large-scale plant, in the 6 to 8 foot range. Gets big, long flower panicles, and they flower over a very long season. They're great for cut flowers. But if you don't have room for Limelight, there's another variety called Little Lime, which is basically another version, has the same kind of chartreusey lime-colored foliage, big long panicles, but at about half the size, maybe 4 to 5 feet tall, 4 to 5 feet wide. But again, will take a lot more sun, good heavy flower producer, great for cut flowers and things like that. But really nice plant for kind of those more transitional areas in the landscape. Bountiful Blue blueberries. This is a plant that was actually found. A lot of people have questions about, what kind of blueberries and where do they come from. This is a plant that was actually discovered in Gainesville, Florida. So it's a great plant, great blueberry, fruiting type blueberry for southern gardens. This thing I've had for years. It's an absolute all-star of a plant. Very reliable performer. It's got beautiful kind of blue cast to the foliage. Gets a nice kind of pink bud with a white flower in the springtime. It does produce a good edible berry, and it's got beautiful red fall color that will persist for a very long time. Sometimes things like sumacs and Boston ivies and things that people grow for fall color are beautiful, but as soon as they turn, then they shed their leaves. You don't get to enjoy them over a very long period of time. These blueberries really hold on to their foliage for a long, long time. It's something that I would say would be in the 4 to 5 foot range approximately. But this is a plant, you're starting to hear a lot of buzz in the industry and in the gardening magazines about things like what they're calling foodscaping, where people are incorporating, it's not so much the vegetable gardens out behind the barn anymore, it's incorporated into your regular suburban landscape. And this is a plant that's great for that. Even if you have no interest in growing blueberries, it's highly ornamental, very tough performer. It's a great plant. and you have the added benefit of that it's a berry producer. And there's a lot of things kind of coming sort of in this kind of a line, small fruits, you know, from 2 feet or less to in this range, 4 or 5 feet, but there's been a lot of breeding raspberries, blackberries, blueberries that are very interesting, good-looking plants that could easily be used, you know, in a regular foundation planting.
Will it take full sun?
Yeah, I've got mine in full sun. The spring bouquet viburnum or viburnum tinus compactum, they had a bunch of those probably you noticed as you were walking in. They're budded now and blooming. They've got nice pink bud, nice white flower, 4 to 6 foot tall, but again, this is one that can be maintained shorter than that. Nice evergreen foliage. It's a good, tough plant. It's not too finicky about soil types and whatnot, but really nice evergreen plant. It's always kind of at the nursery one of sort of the harbingers of spring. Like it's one of the first things to bloom for us at the nursery, and a really attractive, good-looking plant. And it's kind of one of those, like every landscape needs one of these kinds of plants. A good evergreen with a nice flower on it. Then some accent plants. This is a brand new one for us this year. This one was brought to us by Dan Hinckley. It's a type of Disporum called Moonlight, or they're also referred to as Chinese fairy bells. This is a little herbaceous perennial, but really, really interesting. It's got a nice variegated, real bright white variegation with kind of a green edge on it. And the foliage on this one, it's all sort of whirled around the stem and it's kind of twisty, so it's got a little bit of texture to it. Because of the way that it grows, it's a little more stemmy, for lack of a better word, so it will blow in the wind. You get a little more movement out of it than you would, you know, maybe something that kind of appears similar, like a hosta or something. But this is a good one, again, for like eastern exposures, something like that, some sunlight in the morning, then in the shade in the afternoon. But really nice plant, and it's a great sort of a size in that it's in the 18 to 24 inch range, something like that. So it kind of makes that transition from your larger foundation plants down to maybe your seasonal color, your perennials. It kind of helps bridge that gap. And again, really nice white accent, so it's great, particularly against darker, you know, red foliage things like loropetalums and whatnot. Really, really nice, bright little plant. Climbs hardy gardenia. This is one of the hardiest gardenia varieties that we grow. Really nice, clean look to it, dark green, and it's a very short growing gardenia, 2 foot or less on average. And about that wide, kind of makes a nice little mound. You get obviously a very fragrant, it's a single flower, about the size of, you know, 2-3 inches but really nice heavenly gardenia type fragrance to it. Good tough plant, and again, sort of a really nice size in that it can make a transition from taller sort of foundation plants down to shorter annual color. With all gardenias, even in Southern California, they are evergreen, but they can look kind of peaked through the winter. Like once the soil temps drop below a certain level, they can't draw iron out of the soil, so they'll tend to get kind of chlorotic looking, but they're worth it because they look good all summer long, and you just can't beat a gardenia for smell, really.
So if they have that problem in the winter, could you spray it forward? Do you feed it?
I mean, you can, but it's just kind of something you live with more, I would say.
How long do they bloom?
3 weeks or so, roughly. This is a type, I don't know how many people are familiar with African iris or butterfly iris, but this is a Dietes variety that was brought to us actually from a long-time Monrovia customer named Peter Perino, and he's down in Metairie, Louisiana. This is a plant that he and his brother actually found and have brought to market, but it's a big improvement over some of the old-fashioned, like the Erioides and the bicolor type African iris, in that it's much, much more disease-resistant. Some of those have a tendency to they have problems with rot and whatnot in the center. This one's a really, really good, tough, durable plant. It's got a really exotic, it almost kind of looks like an orchid, the flower on it, and it comes out on very elongated stems. It's got a nice foliage to about 2-3 feet tall that tends to be fairly upright. And I found with these that they'll go through several rounds of flowering. This plant isn't hardy for me in the ground in Tulsa, but I've also found it makes a pretty good house plant. It's easy to bring in the wintertime, but nice evergreen plant and really interesting, kind of a different sort of a flower to it. Ever red loropetalum. I mean, I'm sure everybody around here is familiar with loropetalums or French flowers. This variety, in my opinion, it's the darkest red. It's the closest to true red that I've seen in terms of flower for loropetalum. If you never touched it, it's going to get in the 5 to 6 foot range, but it could easily be maintained at 2 or 3 feet, something like that. They do have some patio trees on this one also. It makes a nice little patio tree for containers and things. But really nice dark maroon foliage that holds well through the summer, and a really good, as close to true red as I've seen on a loropetalum. And good loropetalums in general are pretty tough plants. This is a type of Nandina. It's a variety called Chime. But I just think it's really, really cool. It's very, very funky looking. It's really lacy, airy. This is one you kind of have to have a little bit of patience with, because when it's young, it tends to look kind of gangly and awkward and thin, but the longer you have it, the fuller it gets. As you can see, it would be great in containers, but I like it just as an accent in the landscape, particularly because it's got such a nice, lacy, kind of airy texture to it. You put that next to something with a big broadleaf on it, it really makes a good show. And Nandinas are about as tough as they get in terms of plants. Very tolerant of, I mean, they're one of those plants. As long as you get the bucket plant, as long as you get the roots planted down, they're going to live pretty much. So it's a really good, tough plant. And then some specimen plants. This Felix Jury Magnolia, they've got some out here. I noticed this is unfortunately they're past bloom, but this is absolutely one of my favorite magnolia varieties. If you ever see this thing in flower, the picture really doesn't do it justice. It's a bright, electric, almost shocking pink. It's really, really beautiful. And the flowers on this thing are huge. 10, 12 inches across on it. Really, really impressive. And a great small tree for, again, in that 15 to 20 foot range. It wants to grow. We grow them as a single stem, truly as a tree. That particular one is planted right in front of the office there at our Oregon nursery. But really nice small tree. Doesn't get too wide, doesn't get too tall. If you've got it, so they're great for kind of getting up on the corner of the house or near the house. It's something that, if you have a windstorm, it's not going to blow over and break your house in half. They just don't get that big, but beautiful plant. Really, really unique flower. You really have to see it in flower to appreciate it, but it's absolutely one of my favorites. And then I've also got Yellowbird, which is, again, similar type of plant. It's a deciduous magnolia. You get a nice flower early in the season. It's darker than some of the other yellow flowering magnolia varieties that I've seen. Most people think of magnolias as being pink or kind of purple, so this one is definitely different if you like yellow. And then another plant that I think can be kind of underused, but particularly in the patio tree form like you see in the bottom right-hand corner, are the 9-barks or Physocarpus. I think they're beautiful plants, and they're good, tough plants as well. They've got a nice... You'll see the bark on the trunk as these plants age. It starts to kind of peel, kind of similar to like a river birch or something like that. It's got a nice exfoliating bark. It's got a good dark purple this particular variety is called Coppertina. It's got a little bit of that orangey kind of coppery color in the center of the leaves, but it does flower in the springtime with kind of a pink flower. So you get some flower. Relatively good fall color on it, and then you've got the bark interest the rest of the year. But this again is a good one if you've got a small space or you're looking for more of a formal flowering tree and you don't have a lot of room. This is a really good choice and a good tough plant. Bald cypress, probably most people are familiar with bald cypress, the big giant bald cypress. This particular variety is called Pave Minaret. And again, it's a personal favorite. Bald cypress are just really, really good, tough trees. And this is one that I've never seen it more than about 10 or 12 feet tall and maybe 5 or 6 feet wide. So again, great specimen. It fits in kind of that spot over on the corner of the house or the garage or whatever. But nice. It almost kind of reminds me a little bit of like an upright fern because it's got that really nice, dissected, soft bald cypress type foliage. It does get a kind of yellowy to orange fall color. It does drop its needles like all bald cypress do, but a great little plant. And this one I don't notice much in terms of, because of its smaller stature, you don't really have issue with like the cypress knees and things like you can see on bald cypress in a lot of cases. And then, similar to what Kevin mentioned, if you have more questions or if you're seeking more information, there's a ton of stuff on our website. You can follow us across all the different social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, but there's a lot of stuff on there that's just good general gardening information. There's a lot of how-to videos. There's a lot of design inspiration, recipes, decorating. You know, we try to touch not so much on specific plants, but kind of more on gardening in general, and gardening more outdoor living, you know, as a lifestyle type. But you can follow us. We also have a semi-monthly newsletter that you're welcome to sign up for, that we send out, called Plant Savvy. It's got a lot of great tips and whatnot in there. But there's a wealth of information on our website if you're wanting more information. There's also some really handy filters on there if you're working on a garden design and you're wondering, well, you can plug in these different parameters. I want a full sun plant for this zone that, you know, that grows this tall and flowers at this time, and it'll spit you back a list of everything in our catalog that fits those parameters. So it can be really handy that way. And it's a nice way to kill some time on a cool rainy day like today. If you can't get out and garden, you can garden, you know, through the internet. So. But that was most everything I planned to talk to you all about today. Like I said, if you have questions or comments or whatever, you're welcome to come up to me afterwards. Or if anybody has any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them now. If not, I really appreciate your time this morning, and I hope you have a great day.